want to build a community and share other women's stories. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tea with TE, the She Who Leads podcast. Today, we're doing something a little bit different, and I've got one of my favourite people from the industry here to talk with me today. And Jeremy is not a female, but is very much a female advocate and is the founder of Ylead. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Terri. Thank you very much for inviting me.
And I'm so excited. I think we can start by sharing how you and I crossed paths and also just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of those fortunate things, wasn't it? Because we were both invited to be part of a panel that a company has been running called Future Gen, which is about the future generation of women in leadership, female empowerment. And the idea was, well, we want to get more men involved. This isn't just something for women. And so I was invited to do a little talk on male allyship, and then we had a panel. It was you, I, and someone else from another company's, senior leader called Kula, and we just had a great conversation, didn't we, about male allyship and how we can work together to create gender equity. So yeah, that's how it all came about.
And it was a great discussion, and it fed in very well with all of the things that I think we do as individuals, but equally what we're striving for as a group, which is very much helping to create a world of equity. Do you want to just share a bit on Ylead and what it is that you do there?
Yeah, of course. So my first career actually wasn't spent, I'm not a serial entrepreneur. My first career was spent rather unimaginatively in one company. I worked for Barclays for 27 years and having started in branches, spent a few years in head office roles. I think I found my calling about midway through my career when I moved into scale leadership roles. And after a couple of years of not being particularly good at it, I decided that I wanted to get better at it, and I began to find it incredibly rewarding. So I decided after about 12 years into my career to nail my colors to the leadership mast, and that's what I did. I led large teams of branches. I led business regions. I had a spell overseas running one of our countries in Africa. And, I just found leadership to be a real privilege, and I love the responsibility. And having come back from my overseas gig, I did a couple more years. And I think I just got to the point where I was nudging 50. And I thought 27 years is long enough. And I wasn't as excited about the 10 years ahead of me than I was before. So I thought it's time for me to go off and do what I really care about, what I'm really passionate about, which is leadership, not really banking. And I set up Ylead initially just as a vehicle through which I could do more leadership work. But during the pandemic, I thought what I want to do is create an organization that can help other leaders to lead with purpose and with a sense of, well, why do I lead, and therefore why should others follow me? And so that's what I did. Started trading in 2021. 2022 was the second year, and that's when I started to make a bit of I wouldn't say a pivot into gender equity, but I've always believed that we have more female leaders and more leaders generally leading with a more balanced set of traits, not just purely overtly masculine traits, but using feminine traits as well. The world would be a better place, workplaces would be fairer. And that's really led me to sort of almost get to the point where it's still leadership, but we really focus now on how we can create equity in workplaces and encourage leaders to be more balanced in their approach.
And there has obviously always been a theme, I think, from how you have done this, but can we talk a little bit about the difference of trying to reverse the narrative? And obviously you've talked to me about it in terms of having a room, actually, rather than preaching to a room full of women.
Yeah.
Why don't we reverse that and actually think about the impact that could have? So I'd love to just hear a bit more around what you do with Ylead, but also the impact that it has, not just on the female generation, but also on male leaders.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because I realized as I was starting to explore this, my education on this is relatively new. I spent the first 52 years of my life thinking I was a good guy, but then really wasn't particularly educated and didn't understand the issue sufficiently. So when I did, I thought I now want to go out there and start to share some of this. And the very first opportunity I had was I did a talk for International Women's Day for a large organization. And I was invited to talk about male allyship. So I did. And in the audience, about 90 people, of which I think 5 were men, and 3 of those were employees of the company. And it seemed to go down well, and the stuff I was talking about resonated, but I realized that wasn't my audience, because you are preaching to the converted. You're talking about how men need to be more understanding of the issues, and do more of the unpaid work at home, things like that. Women go, yeah, of course. It's men that need to kind of hear this stuff and be educated in the same way that I've been. So I think, and I also think from a lot of the gender equity programs I've seen through my career, it's almost like, no, men, this doesn't concern you.
Yeah.
We're over here fixing the women, and women don't actually need fixing. That's the first problem. But the second thing is it's exclusionary in its very kind of nature. So for me, the missing ingredient from gender equity is men, and even more specifically, it's men and women working together. So we've absolutely got to bring men in. Otherwise, we'll never be able to make progress. And the fact is, men are still retain the majority of the power and the influence. So by not including them, not helping them to become part of the solution, you're only ever going to make small progress, which is what we're making at the moment.
Yeah, which is one of those things, isn't it? I think until we actually enroll the men onto these courses and say, actually, let's try and make it at least a bit more equal. Like you say, having 5 men in a room full of women, that wasn't the agenda, and it wasn't what people were striving to do. And I don't know why naturally men don't feel as though they should be in that room. Like, look at the event that we were part of for the Future Gen for Hayes McIntyre, and actually the guy on my team said to me, I don't need to come to that. I was like, why?
Yeah.
I hate me for calling him out, so sorry. But it's that narrative, I think, that naturally I think, oh, well, it's not targeted, because it was the female leadership series. And I think then automatically maybe people exclude themselves and think, actually, well, that doesn't relate to me, or I don't feel like I need to go because I am an ally. And like, great, it's all well and good saying that you are an ally. And I know that you talk about on Wednesdays we smash the patriarchy, and we're trying to do more in terms of getting men involved in these initiatives. What's your thoughts around how we can do that, and how can we try and shift the mold slightly, even just to have 20 instead of 5 people in the room? I know it's all small steps, right? It's not something that happens overnight. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, Terry, that is the key question I've been asking myself for the last 6-9 months, maybe even 12 months, when I first started to really get involved in this. And there are definitely answers. From what I've seen, there are ways to do it. I think part of it is understanding what holds men back. What are the things that stop men from getting involved? You've already touched on one or two of them. I mean, one, and this, I read a brilliant book by a woman writing about male allyship called Her Allies, and her name is Hira Ali. We connected on LinkedIn, and we had a conversation. And she said, "Oh, I've written a book," and it just happened to be answering some of the questions I was looking for. But it all resonates with me. So there's 3 things that she says in her book, and I completely can relate to these. The first one is that men are apathetic about this because they think it doesn't concern them. They think it's women's issues. Gender equity is about women, isn't it? Which is a real misconception. And it's not because the men are stupid, and it's just because that's the way it's been positioned for many, many years, decades, actually. So I think the first thing is help men overcome the apathy by realizing it does concern you. What is causing this isn't men versus women. It's not men being bad, women suffering as a result. There's this whole construct, which is why I say we smashed the patriarchy on Wednesday, of the patriarchy, which is really damaging and holds women back and creates loads of barriers that women face. But it also creates loads of barriers and challenges for men too. So I think the first thing is to understand, to help men realize, no, this concerns you as well. This really does. So that's overcoming the apathy. The second one, I think, is just fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of being in an environment where it doesn't feel comfortable. And the irony is, I mean, I'm sure this is something you experience as a very senior woman in an organization. I would imagine there's been times when you've been the only woman in the room.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we talked about this, didn't we? This came up at the Future Gen event where, you ask any woman in the city, goes, "Oh yeah, I've been the only one in the room," and so you kind of know what it feels like, but men don't. Men are always the majority, so it feels quite comfortable. You suddenly put them in a room where it's not familiar, and they get to know what it's like. And it feels uncomfortable. They're worried about saying the wrong thing. They worry about making a mistake. And
Mhm.
so fear is the second thing. We've got to try and find a way of overcoming that fear. And the third one is just really prosaically, it's just ignorance. Men just don't understand the issues. They don't understand the barriers women face. They don't understand the various impacts. And I say that as a man who was exactly the same.
Yeah.
For 52 years, I thought I was a good guy. And I was doing the best I could with what I knew, but now I know much better. So I'm trying to do better, in the old words of Maya Angelou. So yeah, I think it's we've got to find a way of overcoming those things, but really it's okay. Bringing men into the conversation is absolutely crucial. So even if you go from like 5 to 20, that is progress.
And I know you have this saying, and it's one of those posts from Smashing the Patriarchy that went a bit viral. That was
Yes.
essentially not all men. And
Yeah.
some of the comments in there were from men that were saying, actually, I do want to speak up, but I don't know how. Or I'm in this kind of macho environment where I don't feel like it's the right thing for me to say anything. So I know we don't have the answer per se, but how can we help men in those situations kind of feel as though they can talk? I know you kind of talked about it before, that you would be the person that would be defending on some post, being like, why is no one sticking up for women in this
Yeah.
situation? And
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. That is something that I think we've kind of grown through culture, and it's not just British culture. I think it's generally speaking globally. It
Absolutely.
seems to be the case. So what do you think we can do to challenge those norms? Do you think there is something that we can do there?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I'm an eternal optimist, so I should probably just point that
Yeah.
out.
It's not a bad
Yeah,
thing.
I have learned now to not just hope for the best, but also prepare for the worst. So there is some thought that goes into this. Um, I think the key thing for men is education. And again, not in a patronizing way, not in a condescending way. We have to create safe environments where men of all ages, but particularly when you get to my age,
Yeah.
we are the archetype. I'm the archetypal middle-aged white man.
Mm-hmm.
And even some of the narrative that goes around that, I think male, pale, and stale is a term that's often used. I know when I first heard it, I thought it was quite funny, but I now realize just how insulting that
Yeah.
is. That assumption that yeah. So I think it's definitely not doing things like that, but create an environment where men can learn about things and unlearn things,
Yeah.
because we have been conditioned from boys to behave in a certain way and to have certain expectations and certain privileges. That's our conditioning. Just in the same way that girls have been conditioned from a very
Yeah.
young age. It's not a question of, oh yeah, I'll just do something different. And you've got to really understand and create an environment where that can be explored and can be thought about. And what I've learned, and I haven't always got this right, which is why I'm learning all the time, is you can't just kind of point the finger. You can't make men wrong and just say, when I first started to get involved in this, I would talk about things, and if then I got a counter argument from a man, I might just go on the attack a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was almost like a bit of a reformed smoker. I've stopped smoking. It's like, oh, smoking's the worst thing in the world. It's like, men, why don't you understand this stuff? I mean, how lacking in self-awareness is that? And I realized actually that wasn't particularly helpful. So I think it's really important to create an environment where you can just help men to explore these things and again remove some of those barriers of what he talked about, that kind of fear of being made to look stupid.
Yeah. And I do think there's some kind of balancing act that we need to come to, right? Me being in search, diversity is at the forefront of every senior hire right now. So you do have to think about men too. I think in their situations, yes, it's amazing and we're striving for change at the top and we do want to have more female leaders. Equally, I do think that we shouldn't be making moves for hires because somebody is a female.
No.
It should really be based on the right person for the role. And I can see where some men will think, well, I've got zero chance now because actually I know what the agenda is and there's probably no other female leaders on that board. And so we need the change to happen. But at the same time, I think we need to have equitable opinions so that actually the people, that there's not a feeling of, well, they're benefiting for everything and we're not at all. Whereas We could argue that I think that's probably been the other way around for a very long time. So I think maybe it's our turn. But at the same time, I do understand that
Yeah.
that it's difficult to strike a balance, I think. And
Mm.
what we're seeing at the moment is some businesses going completely the opposite way. And obviously everything is about needing to change the agenda and get some more females at the top, which I'm here for. But I think we do need to obviously try and bring people along on the journey regardless of gender. I think just kind of being like, okay, let's just actually strive for equity. I don't think I think we've got a long way to go when it comes to that.
Yeah, we do. And I think like so many things, again, this is almost where the way society runs is in a very masculine way. When it identifies a problem, it's like we must fix the problem. What we have here is a systemic serious set of norms that go back decades, centuries. You don't just fix those. They need thought and they need collaboration, and they need to just be a little bit more sophisticated in our approach. And so, I mean, one of the first things I think is problematic is when you end up having those kind of one-dimensional conversations. Well, if we do this, it's going to, I've got no chance of getting that position. I agree with you totally that we've had it, way too good for too long. So that should be fine. But just using that one example, it's like, it's so much broader than that. And I try and steer people away from those. Exactly. Oh yeah, but I think the other thing then more broadly is that this isn't a zero-sum game. Gender equity isn't about men giving something to women. It's research proves, and you think about things like disability, research proves that when you elevate a disadvantaged group, all it does is create more opportunities for everyone. And I often use the really, really overly simplistic example of when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of provision made for people with disabilities. Then we started to introduce accessibility and the Disability Act, and so now people who need help or don't find it to easy to kind of climb stairs or to kind of get access to buildings can do that relatively easily because the provision's there. But everyone can use that as well. Everyone has the same additional access. So it's created more opportunities for everyone, not just for the disadvantaged group. And it's exactly the same with gender. And those are the kind of conversations that we need to have. Much, much broader than that.
Yeah, which is interesting how you position it like that, because I think some people wouldn't see it as that, right? Which is interesting in itself. Thinking about things like maternity, paternity, we are striving now for equity within those policies, I think. Obviously, I know that it is very different from a paternity perspective currently, but there are lots of organizations that are saying, well, actually, it shouldn't really matter whether you're the mother or the father. You should both have equal opportunity, which is great. And so why can't we, these are the benefits that I think people should be thinking of and going, okay, actually, I can see the reason as to why I should maybe support women a bit more.
Yeah, this is why sort of policies on their own aren't enough. It's these are cultural issues, these are societal issues. Think about what happens when a woman falls pregnant. Almost universally, what happens initially, everyone goes, "Oh, it's so wonderful, it's so brilliant, it's all lovely, it's very exciting." When a man is going to have a baby, what do his mates do? It's like, oh, mate, you enjoy your time now while you can.
No, for you.
Forget your life is going to end. It's just like, and it's kind of under the label of banter.
Yeah.
It doesn't exactly make a man sort of think, oh, this is going to be the best experience of my life. And it's all humor. Like so much of stuff is all kind of counts as humor, but that kind of the impact of fatherhood is so different from motherhood. And the other thing that happens is that you imagine if a man says, right, I'm going to take paternity leave, I'll be off for 4 weeks. You're like, you enjoy your rest, mate, have a lovely time, look after it's not, well, no, I'm going to be actually looking after a baby, doing my part, bonding with the child. It's like it's not the same. And those are some of the things we need to kind of change.
And I think flip that on its head, right? So there are women in business who probably don't want to say to their staff when they are pregnant, I'm pregnant, because they're like, oh, you're going to treat me differently. And then you get those comments of saying, oh, but you'll come back straight away, right? Or you'll come back. So there's a pressure that work's more important.
Yeah.
And I think we still haven't got that right from a cultural perspective of actually encouraging people to want to feel like they are empowered to go off and create a family. I think we're in a position where people are nervous about it. And I think that's something that it just shouldn't be happening now. It's crazy, but you still get those comments of like, oh, well, we won't give that opportunity to you then because I don't know when you to come back.
It's horrendous, and I completely agree with you. One of the things, the year before I left Barclays, I remember having a conversation with 3 different women. 2 were in my kind of extended team, and another one was in a sort of a neighboring team. All of them were pregnant for the first time. And when they told me, I was like, oh, it's wonderful. We had a lovely chat about it and how exciting it is. And, I had a couple of kids who were both teenagers by then. So obviously I had wisdom to impart. But it's lovely. I think it's a great thing. What struck me was all of them had the same kind of narrative, that they were all quite senior. 2 of them were directors. One was a vice president who was absolutely director material. And they all said that, well, I think a couple of them hadn't really announced it yet at that point. But anyway, I'll let people know. And I imagine then at some point, things will start to slow down for me a little bit at work because, they won't want to give me any extra assignments. And then I'll obviously go and have my maternity leave, probably have 9 or 12 months, which is what a lot of people do. And then I'll come back and I'll try and reestablish, find out where I am, find out what's happening in business, what's changed, is my boss still there? And then maybe after a couple of years, I'll try to rebuild my career or reestablish my career.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the internal narrative that we can have in a what's supposed to be a more kind of balanced industry than many. And they're senior women, very capable, and they're basically writing off their careers. And that's if they have one child.
Yeah.
Now, at least 2 of them have now subsequently had another child soon after. So they're losing about 5 years. That's insane, and that's not their fault. That's because that's what happens. What should be happening is there should be I'm going off on a bit of one here. I've always believed this. There should be a pregnancy policy. So I know policy in the loosest sense. It's like someone announces their pregnancy, like, brilliant. Okay, now what we're going to do is wrap a load of support around making sure that whilst you're helping to keep the population growing, which is really, really important for the sustainability of the human race, we're going to make sure your career can continue. So let's think about how this next 6 months, whatever the time frame is you can maximize that, but also make sure you can take care of yourself while you're away. We'll keep in touch as much as you want to, what's happening. And then before you come back, we'll start to look at the opportunities, where there might be opportunities for promotion, for new roles, based on what you need. And when you're back, we'll understand that you've been through 12 months of raising a child, and you won't want to come back full. You put stuff around it so you can make this transition as smooth as possible. It's such a massive blocker, I believe, to women making progress, and men don't have that. Despite the things I said earlier on, we just get on with it. We also experience that kind of fatherhood bump, where it's like, so you're a father now, you're kind of settled down, you're responsible, and you probably need more money to pay for your family. So that is something which is so inevitable. It's so important. And yet no companies that I'm aware of have a proper policy for it. So, it's I think women around the world experience this.
Yeah, I've got one friend who is going back from maternity leave in March. She works for the NHS. And actually, that's the first time I've heard somebody calling her up during her pregnancy saying, there's a promotion for you.
Wow.
We want you to just come in and talk to people about it, but we're not going to put anyone else in for it. You deserve it. Shouldn't be hindered because you're not here.
Yeah.
And I just think that's fantastic. She told me today, and I thought that's amazing. Yeah, she's not then worrying, okay, I then have to go back earlier, or these things that I think we do have to think about as women. That, not to discredit any men, but they don't have these things that they do have to think about, which I think we have to. I just wish there was that kind of commonality or the common understanding of, okay, we do get it quite nice in terms of we take out, and if we're now getting shared paternity leave, amazing, you got 6 months off, but you don't really get those comments of like, oh, did you have a nice, well, you might do, I guess, of like, did you have a nice, like you say, did you have a nice break, or how are you going to settle back in as you come back? I just think the narrative is skewed still, but as you say, I think maybe that is something that hopefully we can strive towards not just having a maternity policy, but actually having a pregnancy focus. You've described it to me before of being invited to the party versus being invited to dance. And I really like that analogy, because it's like, well, it's happening to me, so I have to share that information, rather than like, we know that you're going to go through this, so this is what we've set up for you, and this is our succession plan for you.
It's I mean, like all the best analogies, none of them are mine, unfortunately. That's a Vernon Myers quote, but it's exactly, you have to make it as easy as possible for people to, you can't just have the people there, and it's always often really applies to women. We're hiring women, but are you actually creating an environment where they can give it their best? And I have the quote is, even better would be to say, it's not just about being invited to the party, but it's feeling that you're free to dance. You don't have to be invited. Just go and dance. And we'll make it as easy as possible for you to really enjoy yourself and feel comfortable to express yourself. And a lot of companies think they do that, but I don't really know any that actually do.
No. And I think there are businesses, and there are now female health businesses that help companies that are trying to figure this out. And kudos to them, because they are trying to pull in an initiative where they can think more broadly about female health, but thinking about things like menstruation and menopause. That, like, if you're a senior leader and you're going through menopause, it's so difficult, and we don't talk about it enough. We're only just as a society starting to talk about the menopause more, so it's not this taboo subject that people are scared to talk about. Women have to bring them best selves, and then they're going through a hot flush in the middle of a meeting, and there's no way to talk about it or to manage it.
I know.
So, I know that we're getting there. I think we are, but in small doses.
Well, I think it comes back to, sorry, Terri.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, I think this comes back to what we were saying earlier on, because there are organisations that are talking about this. If it wasn't for Davina McCall, I wouldn't even know much about menopause. I know my mum experienced it, but I remember her experiencing it through the inconvenience my father felt.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Interesting.
And I've subsequently spoken to my mum about it, and I now have a much better understanding of what her experience was. And she was lucky; she had a very, very good GP who was very supportive.
Okay,
that's really rare, especially back in with her generation. But it's back to what we were saying earlier, that it shouldn't just be left to women and women's groups to be talking about these. Men should be educated to understand this is the reality of the people that they work with. I mean, the menopause still blows her mind in terms of just how misunderstood, how hard it is to diagnose, the variety of symptoms. And it's not just men not knowing this, women don't know what's happening to their bodies. I've spoken to so many women who feel they're going mad, they got early onset dementia. These are personal testimonies that I've heard from women. We all need to know this stuff. We need to make it easier. I mean, apart from anything else, one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing demographic of people in the workplace is menopausal women. And so if we don't make it as easy as possible, and if we don't wrap a support around that group of people and their particular needs, what tends to happen is a lot of women then check out of the workforce.
It's too much to cope with.
They just, I'm done now. I'll go off and do something else. Or, we're losing so much important talent. So I think there's a huge amount to be done to enable men to be better educated in things like menopause. Menstruation is another one. We rarely talk about it, but I've spoken to friends of mine who have been going for job interviews, and they just wake up that morning and think, oh, great, okay, so then I'm going to have stomach cramps, all the other symptoms that can come with that, your period, and you just have to get on with it, and you're competing with people that don't have to experience that.
Yeah, exactly. And so thinking about actionable steps, as I know that we say, obviously, it's all about the education, and I think we do need to take people on these journeys. And I know you're doing this with Ylead, but what steps can people take to educate themselves, but also to educate their businesses?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I share kind of what has opened my eyes to this, and it was simply because I asked a question of someone. So this is one of the clues. If you're someone listening to this, and what can I do to educate myself? I said to a female friend of mine who I was working with at the time, what can I do to be a better male ally?
Yeah.
And it was in the wake of the Sarah Everard murder, and then the vigil, and the way the women were treated. I was so horrified, not obviously by the act itself, but by the way the women were treated, both by the police and in social media. And I said, what can I do? And she said, read 2 books. And the 2 books she recommended were Laura Bates's Everyday Sexism and Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. And I read them both. Neither of them were an easy read, but it just completely opened my eyes to the realities that women face. So I know sexism exists. I know there's data biases in a world designed by and for men, but I have no idea the extent, just how endemic sexism is. Most women won't just experience sexism in their life, they'll experience it every week. Something will happen. They'll get catcalled, they'll get maybe brushed up against on the tube, or they'll get belittled in a meeting and just, oh, it's banter, whatever. Those things happen all the time. And Invisible Women, I just had no idea the extent of how, for example, in a road traffic accident, women are 47% more likely to suffer a serious injury because all of the safety features in cars, this is today, are designed around the male body. There's someone I've met through some of the work I do, who's now a retired detective inspector in the police force, an absolutely brilliant woman. And I met her because she was talking about how the menopause had nearly broken her at an event I was at. And so it's really honest account of her experience. But one of the conversations she had to me is that she said, do you realize stab vests, and that they are male stab vests we wear? And okay, their badge is unisex, means they're a bit smaller. Women's anatomies
very different.
Are very different. It's insane. So I think I'm sort of going slightly off at a tangent, but I'll come back now, because what that did, that made me kind of think, okay, I didn't know this stuff. I now find out more. And so I've spoken to countless women since then to understand the reality. I've read more and more books, and I now realize I have the agency and also the privilege to do something about this. And the more privilege you have, the more responsibility you have. So for me, it's acted as a real galvanizing force, and me want to be part of this. That's where kind of on Wednesdays you smash the patriarchy postcard. Partly inspired by my daughter, who's got a t-shirt that says on Wednesdays you smash the patriarchy.
Which I love.
Which is, I know, it's cool, isn't it? And she's so it came initially from that, but now I post every single week. I've learned so much through doing that from other people. And I've learned about, again, these things about what holds men back and some of the real issues that women face, and how we, by working together. And I've been really struck by the warmth and the generosity of women when a man starts talking about this stuff, wanting to help, wanting to be inclusive. And that's been a real positive for me. So I think that there is so much that people can do to educate themselves, but almost the first step would be just ask women, speak to women, and remember to listen. We don't need to be doing this. Don't manterrupt. Just listen and learn.
That's one of the favorite terms that I've learned from you, manterruptions.
It's actually quite a good example as well, Terri. Some of the work I was doing some work with a client fairly recently, and I shared manterruptions, and I shared some of the stats behind it. So, for example, on the US Supreme Court, the female justices are 4 times more likely to be interrupted than the male justices. And 96% of the time when they're interrupted, it's by men. So that's just research based on all the transcripts of their court hearings. And so I remember sharing this with this, quite a large group of men and women as well. And the women are kind of like, oh yeah, that's a thing. And men are going, I'm not sure about that. And then subsequent to this, we did follow-ups with everyone to do some group coaching to find out what they'd learned and what barriers they're facing. And the sheer volume of men that came onto those calls and said, manterruptions, I wasn't sure that was a thing. So I went and tested it. And some of them tested it in social settings, and others tested it in the workplace. And they all said the same thing. It's like, oh my God, we interrupt women all the time. We just didn't realize. One guy said to me, I feel sick to my stomach because I do it and I now stop myself. And I said, that's fantastic. That's what we want. You didn't know this. You've been conditioned this way. So manterruptions I often use that example because it's just a really simple way of thinking, I didn't know that was a thing. Now I do. I'll stop doing it. And you cannot stop noticing it. Once you know it's there, you cannot stop noticing it.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? I think it's those little steps that make the difference. And as you say, I think sometimes we'll probably be quick to say, I don't do that. And it's like, maybe just go and have a little bit of a check, an internal self-assessment, and just see. But not everyone, obviously, it's not fair. But I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what do you think the future looks like? And this is something that I think we can take away for ourselves, to thinking about how and I do think we're getting better at educating. Like, I've got nieces and nephews who are saying, you can't say that and you can't do that. And my little nephew is just so thoughtful and is somebody that will always put anybody first, regardless of their gender. So I think we are getting there, and there is this generational shift. But what do you think the future looks like, and what are those small steps that I think people could take, even from any point in their life? It doesn't have to be anybody at the top, right? I think it's just helping to spread the word.
Yeah. I'm an optimist, and in the 12 months that I've been doing this, 18 months that I've been really doing this work, I've learned a lot, and I do think there are lots of positive things we can do that perhaps we're not doing enough of. Fundamentally, the way we'll create gender equity more quickly is by bringing men and women together. And so what the future holds is, I think, hopefully more people doing exactly that. We have to stop making it divisive. Social media is a disaster most of the time, because its purpose is to divide people, and we need to actually rail against that and fight against it. I had a really interesting conversation with my son a few months ago, before I started doing the patriarchy posts, and he's 16, and I was kind of saying that because I made him read Everyday Sexism, so he's been indoctrinated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I just wanted him to understand it, and I do think it's helped him. But I was saying to him, I've been watching a Laura Bates TED talk, and I said, I think sexism getting worse. I was really, so much I read, so much I hear, and he had an interesting thought on it. He said, I don't think it's getting worse. I just think it's getting louder. And I said, explain. And he basically said that he's seen quite a few of his friends who were kind of brought up and were quite sort of sexist in their nature, but now they're making a shift. They're now being more thoughtful about things and embracing different stuff. And he said that the trouble with people like Andrew Tate is that he creates so much volume and he indoctrinates people, but actually, so quite a few of his friends, him included, have now moved away from that. I thought, no, I'm not interested in that stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really quite an insightful comment, particularly for a 16-year-old. But what it made me think was that maybe because I see stuff all the time now, it feels to me like I'm just seeing it everywhere and it's really loud. But whether it is or not, I think what it means is if you've got bad actors coming in and seizing the narrative, people like Andrew Tate and some of the awful world leaders we have, then what we need to do is seize the narrative back. And we need to create similar noise about things which are much more about equity and about working together and about, being empathetic towards people, men and women. The whole male, pale and stale thing is not helpful. No. You show me a man that's going to respond positively to being told, he's male, pale and stale. It's not going to happen. No. But here's some stuff that I think might enable you to understand how the world works a little better. Let's share a few things, go out and test it for yourself. I mean, I always call it, every day I try to sleep less stupid. So if I can learn something about myself or about the world, I'll sleep less stupid tonight. But I think if you can do it in such a way that doesn't criticize and doesn't, diminish everything the way that person lived their life to date, it's just about kind of educating people continuously. So the future for me, I feel positive at the moment, because a lot of the things I've been seeing and doing starting to have an impact, but it's about bringing people together, men and women standing up for gender equity and what's fair. And I also agree with you. I've got a lot of hope with the future generations coming through, who are just much more open-minded, much less socially conditioned in some ways. And I think what we need to do is to listen to them and to help them, not let them get squashed by the patriarchy.
Yeah, and we talked about this a bit before, right? We're in a world now where it's not actually also just female and male genders that we need to talk about. And I think that is also opening the dialogue for future generations. I think they are much more aware. There's a much more broader conversation that's had with younger people than where those conversations sit with us, I think, which, again, not to generalize, but I do think hopefully that does mean an outlook is shifted slightly to what we have been used to. Thank you so much for sharing. Go on.
I was going to ask you, what do you think, Terri? How optimistic do you feel about the future?
I do feel optimistic. I feel like there is genuinely a shift between where I think the typical culture has been of thinking about the progression through organizations of actually having female leadership or having broader perspective on diversity within their teams, which is great. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. And I think we have come a long way. But equally, I think there's still a very, very long way to go.
Yeah.
But I do think we are, even as parents, and I think for anybody that's a parent or an aunt or is influential on children around them, I think we're trying to also shift that dialogue, probably without even understanding as much. I think there are lots of people that are trying to shift the narrative without realizing how much impact that actually has. Allowing boys to cry, for example, like that's changed. I think it's not that kind of macho dominated perspective that we used to have, I think. So I feel positive. I do feel I'm exposed in my job to people that are going through senior searches every day. I do see the difference of women versus men.
Yeah.
But I think it's slowly getting there. Do I think we're anywhere near close of even just, if you still look at boards, it's crazy. I think I told you about that stat. There's more people called Andrew and Simon than there are female or diverse leaders on some of those boards. So that is mind-blowing. And that's where you kind of think that's really disappointing. But I think we can't look at the macro. I think we need to just go micro of what people are doing in their individual teams or in their individual businesses to actually try and make a change.
Yeah, good. It's nice to have an optimistic outlook on this, because it makes me just think we just need to redouble our efforts now, don't we? Be louder, expand that narrative and challenge what's there. And I think this is what's critically important. Is this is not a fight for women or a fight for men. It's a fight for all of us. We're working together with compassion to make things better for ourselves as well as future generation.
Yeah. And you know what? I think sometimes we don't even do that enough for women as women or men as men. And regardless of whether we're trying to create this blended equity, I think we should always just also look out for just everyone in general. And so it's that's something that I've always felt very strongly about. And I think if we can share a bit more of that, everybody will be okay. Well, it makes sense to actually all look out for each other rather than be against one another. So yeah, fingers crossed we're making headway. I know you certainly are helping to change that narrative with Ylead and what you're doing there. So from all of us, we're very, very grateful. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me here.
No, it's been a really interesting conversation. And I think there's a lot that people will take from this and will enjoy.
I hope so.
And might have their own perceptions on. So I'd love to hear from people if they have got that in terms of what they think. But I have one final question for you.
Okay.
Because we are on the Tea with Tea podcast, how do you take your tea?
Okay. I take my tea, very traditional, builders.
Okay.
So quite strong, dash of milk and 1 sugar.
Okay.
There you go. So how do you take your tea, Terri?
I'm similar to you, just no sugar. Sweet stuff.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely not. I need a little bit something else.
Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing such great insights. And great to have you on.
Thanks for inviting me.
No, of course. Thank you. Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.